You want an action-packed week? We've had one here in Starbase.
The launch mount for Pad B was rolled out and lifted.
We have Raptor 3 pictures to talk about, and the first version 3 booster test tank and Ship 35 both rolled out to Massey's for testing. Howdy tank watchers, I'm Jack Beyer for NSF, and this is your Starbase Update, sponsored by Novium. One fun thing about doing a flyover is all the stuff around Starbase that we don't usually get to see. For example, the USS JFK is still being scrapped at the port of Brownsville, and you can see that the shipbreaking process is progressing quite quickly as parts are removed from it piece by piece. Supporting that, cranes and other equipment are visibly working on the deck, and you can see a ton of hardware, including the control tower, has been fully removed already, with just a sad little stump remaining. Moving over to the production site, among the deliveries we saw this week was what looks to be a section of box culvert, if that's the right term. I think it is. Yell at me in the comments if it's not. From the looks of it, it'll be installed somewhere in one of Pad B's various commodity trenches, but we'll have to wait and see for certain. Maybe it'll end up being used somewhere around the production site in support of the new Gigabay. Really, I'm totally guessing here. I have no idea what it's for. This concrete thing, whatever it was then moved onto the Sanchez lot early Monday morning, and we'll just have to wait and see where it resurfaces. Continuing the trend of mystery deliveries, we saw the delivery of 2 objects that were delivered on a flatbed on Monday as well. With a tarp blocking them visually, it was hard to say what they are, but that's how it goes in Starbase. Over at Star Factory, the reshaping of the building's entranceway to make space for the Gigabay is continuing. Most of the glass panels that form the nice front of the building have been removed, and as of Tuesday morning, another part of the glass was being worked on as well. With most of the glass gone, it's only a matter of time until we see the rest of the facade being removed, and then hopefully some rework of the area to aesthetically realign it with the rest of the factory again. On our flyover pictures, you can see the area where the Stargate building was has already been mostly cleared. It could be that SpaceX is preparing the area for a collapse of the rest of the high bay if they want to accelerate the process of its demolition once the building is low enough. Or they're just getting it ready to build a Gigabay there. Over at Highway 4, we can see what seems to be a mixed-use sidewalk between the launch site and production site being created. At least that's what Adrian, the writer of this video, hopes for, because having proper bicycle infrastructure in Starbase sounds very reasonable. I agree, by the way. The distance between the launch site and production site isn't very far, and as more and more people not just work but also live in Starbase, it's important for them to have a safe way to recreate and exercise. I already see loads of SpaceXers jogging up and down Highway 4, so this just makes sense. A bit further down the road to Brownsville, you can see some water lines being laid out, as it seems there is finally a water main being run for Starbase. In case you didn't know, until now, Starbase does not get its water from plumbing connected to the city. All the water, not just for the launch deluge and production site needs, but also for all the residents in the village as well, has to be trucked in. And everything runs on septic systems rather than, say, a municipal sewer. This is a big deal. Between the bike lane, the Highway 4 improvements, and the water main, Starbase as a city is really beginning to shape up. And of course, anything SpaceX can do to ease the traffic on Highway 4 is huge. Ideally, this would eliminate the need for water trucks entirely, though I'm not sure based on the sizing of that pipe. Speaking of infrastructure improvements, the roundabout at the end of Highway 4 is also progressing, and it seems like it might just need a little bit of paint and a few small cosmetic details, and it will be ready to use. This will once again make it easier for trucks and other vehicles to turn around at the end of the highway instead of stopping traffic doing 9-point turns in the middle of the road. Checking in at the Massey outpost at the beginning of the week, we can see that SpaceX workers were present at the bottom of the structural test stand, and we can also see some of the over 50 pistons that will be attached to the version 3 booster test tank during its testing. Work at the start of the week on the structural test stand appeared to be ongoing, so maybe it wasn't the test tank that's been making us wait after all, but more the readiness of the structural test stand itself. We, by the way, did a deep dive on Test Tank 17 a few episodes ago, so make sure to check that out for all the details. Speaking of that test tank, on Tuesday, it was still residing inside of the Star Factory right in front of the windows, and it seemed like there wasn't much work going on with it, at least visibly. I should probably take a moment here to note that I've heard that this test tank, which in the absence of seeing a label, we have taken to calling Test Tank 17, is actually booster 18.1. I usually don't ever do this. We typically wait until we see a label to call a thing, even if we know what it's supposed to be called. But in this case, I'm just gonna start calling it Booster 18.1. If you wanna still call it Test Tank 17, be my guest. I'm going to call it Booster 18.1. For clarity, I'll probably refer to it as both here and there. I know that's confusing. That's how it goes when we don't see a label. Hey, SpaceX, put more labels on things. Thank you, bye. Anyways, sorry if that's annoying, but there you go. Besides the work on the test stand, Massey seemed relatively empty at the start of the week after a surge of prototypes that were tested there over the last few weeks. Of course, as you're about to see, this would change dramatically later in the week. Early on Friday, Test Tank 17, or Booster 18.1, whatever you want to call it, was kicked out of the Star Factory in preparation for its move to the Massey outpost. It was first moved over to the Sanchez lot, though, where it was parked, probably waiting for better weather and the next available closure to move. For a little bit there, Gage and I thought we were going to get hit by golf ball-sized hail, but thankfully that never happened, though it did rain a lot. What did happen the next night, though, was the test tank finally rolled to Massey's, and boy howdy, it revealed quite a few interesting details about the next version of the Super Heavy booster. Look at that aft dome design. It looks completely different than anything we've seen so far. This is the all-important section of the next generation of Super Heavy prototypes that has to take all of the temperature differential between Raptor heat and cryogenic liquid oxygen and all of the forces from all of the thrust from 33 Raptors pushing up and the weight of the payload and aerodynamic forces pushing down. You can see the bits of the plumbing that represent the connection points for the 33 Raptor engines. Each of these will be connected to a hydraulic ram on the structural test stand so that they can gather data on this fantastic, completely new design. And hang on a second there, did you see that? Does the frickin' booster have tiles now? Yes, it seems like metallic thermal protection tiles have been attached to the booster's aft end. Raptor 3 famously will have no thermal shielding like Raptor 2 and the current generation of Super Heavy does, so it's logical that this could be to test the next generation of engine heat shielding. Or maybe they're testing metal tiles that SpaceX is exploring one way or another next to the other material options they have for heat shields. Remember, on past flights, we've seen the booster's engine section glow quite a lot, and it might be one of the hottest parts of the booster in general. The ship, of course, is a whole other level. Either way, this thing is gorgeous. I'm so glad I was able to catch it rolling out. This week, we also saw the delivery of a Beyer BG-46 rotary drilling rig by the company Malcolm. These types of drilling rigs, according to Malcolm's website, are used for jet grouting, deep soil mixing, auger cast, or omega pile installation. Whatever those things are. So it sounds like there might be more soil or foundation work that SpaceX is planning over at the launch site, as that's where the rig was delivered next to Pad B's deluge system. Of course, this could be just a temporary parking spot, and we'll have to wait and see where the system is ultimately used. In terms of areas that might need foundation soon, an area at the gate of the launch site was having groundwork done on it on Monday. This is the launch site's main gate, and I suspect the work here was in preparation for the rollout of Pad B's launch mount, which, don't worry, we're going to talk about. Another indicator for more foundation work coming up is the delivery of more rebar that is used to reinforce the foundation and walls at Starbase. This huge amount of rebar was delivered to Pad B, and we will see if it's part of more flame trench work or if it'll be used elsewhere. Late at night on Monday, SpaceX also installed more hardware on the new expansion of the orbital tank farm. In this case, a very practical installation, as it looks like the lifted part was a staircase that was installed somewhere in the center of the tank farm. In fact, I lost count of how many of these things they lifted, and every time they started another one, the crane operator would just like honk the horn nonstop. It was great. SpaceX also took the delivery of more modules for the orbital tank farm, in what almost looks like control modules, multiple of which were delivered on Tuesday. SpaceX has recently changed the way they assemble the tank farm in a very modular building block design, and these follow that design idea. Another delivery on Wednesday was what looked like another huge pump, as you can see here underneath this blue tarp. By the way, ignore that giant launch mount in the background for now, but I promise we will get to it here in just a moment. You said you wanted an action-packed episode. This is an action-packed episode. There's still a bunch more to go over, including our Raptor 3 picture, but before that, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Novium. This video was sponsored by Novium. You know them, they make beautiful pens that hover magnetically, and they're doing a Kickstarter for the first pocket-friendly model, the Hover Pen Traverse. So you can still have a pen that looks cool and writes great, even while out and about or traveling. Traversing? It's a really cool design. The cap is the base and also an integrated clip. It can smoothly switch between hover mode and writing mode with a twist, and yes, that means like all other hover pens, it floats in the air magnetically. What's even cooler though, is they're doing a limited Apollo edition, which contains an actual Caton foil specimen from the Apollo 11 command module, Columbia. And they're only going to make 1,969 of them. When I read this part of the ad brief, by the way, I was like, are you kidding me? The foil is an authentic part of the command module, sold by Mini Museum. The authenticity of the command module sample has been certified and verified by retired NASA production control engineer William R. Whipkey, who worked on the Apollo 11 command module. Early bird supporters can get up to a 30% discount on the Kickstarter, and it ends on May 14th, so get in there now. The link is in the description. In addition to the Kickstarter, Novium also has all the hover pens you already know and love. The Interstellar edition is my personal favorite. It comes in cool colors, the best of which is Mars Magma, don't at me. And they also have a premium version with, and I swear this is real, an actual meteorite shard embedded in it. So please support us and a company doing such cool things like Novium, and treat yourself or someone you know to a really rad writing device. Use code NSF to receive 10% off all hover pens and free shipping to most countries. And don't forget, get up to 30% off on the hover pen Traverse on Kickstarter today. Thanks again to Novium for sponsoring this video. Checking in with the Rocket Garden, we can see Booster 17 and Booster 12. Booster 12, of course, already had its flight, and with the fact that they just committed to reusing Booster 14 instead of Booster 12, it's highly unlikely that we'll see a reflight of this older booster in the future. Booster 17's future, on the other hand, is still wide open, as it probably depends on which prototypes out of Boosters 14, 15, 16, and 17 SpaceX decides to fly on the remaining booster generation flights before transitioning to the next generation. But it could very well be a candidate for the 11th flight of Starship. However, there is an argument to be made here that if SpaceX wants to focus on ship testing, they should just use flight-proven boosters that they know work and not focus on using a new booster, and instead transition to booster block 3 when they are ready. So maybe we get to a point where Booster 17 doesn't even get used. It's not like that kind of thing hasn't happened before. Welcome to the news segment of Starbase Update that was maybe prompted by the fact that a lot of vehicles got stuck this week. Welcome to This Week in Traffic. Starting off on Monday, a cement truck apparently ran off Highway 4 and into the salt flats. Turns out cement trucks are not good at off-roading. It took some heavy machinery to recover the truck, and we all sincerely hope the driver and his career were unharmed. Unfortunately, this is far from the first time I've seen cement trucks, or otherwise, suffer the perils of Highway 4. Beware, I say, beware. In addition to the cement truck, a flatbed that transported one of the launch mount clamps seems to have gotten stuck in the middle of Highway 4. Once again, SpaceX's crack team of vehicle and road assistance crews were ready and recovered the vehicle quickly. What a week in Starbase traffic. Alright, before we dive deep into the rollout of Pad B's launch mount and our flyover pictures, it's time for our McGregor Minute. SpaceX was quite busy this week at their engine test facility in McGregor, Texas. Between Sunday and Thursday, 22 different tests happened in McGregor. This of course includes Falcon 9 second stage testing, as the company has to support its crazy Falcon 9 launch cadence. To that end, there were 3 second stage firings this week. On the Raptor 3 front, it seems to be a more quiet week, or at least the usual 4-minute 20-second firing profile has disappeared. Well, I lied a bit there. It was more quiet on the firing, but how about Raptor version 3 serial number 16 just rolling by our cameras? The super clean engine here still shows almost no plumbing on the outside. It's just insane how simplified it looks. And they're already up to Raptor number 16, so that is almost half a super heavy booster, assuming all engines make it through qualification. This 100% doesn't happen, but still cool though. Overall, we saw roughly 2,045 seconds of Raptor firing time this week as SpaceX tests more and more Raptor engines, including one test in the horizontal North Bay, which went for 458 seconds and even demonstrated some gimbling on the stand. As always, if you want to see all the Raptor action happening every day, make sure you check out our 24/7 McGregor livestream. On Sunday, SpaceX removed the beam that had been present between 2 of the Orbital Launch Mount legs over the last few days. This beam was moved at some point from one set of legs to the other and seemed to be related to leveling the 4 legs in preparation for the launch mount to arrive. You really don't want to install your very heavy launch mount, TM, on an odd angle. Over at the Sanchez lot, where the launch mount was still resting at this point in the week, you can see that SpaceX workers started to paint and tidy up the mount itself ahead of its transport. This includes painting the door and walls in gray. This could of course also be corrosive protection paint, and not just to make it look nice. That's not the only tidying up and painting that was going on this week though. On Tuesday, you can see how at Pad B, it's now fully painted, and even the numbers that were present there since the beginning of its assembly have been painted over. While the mount was being prepared for rollout, the delivery of hold-down arms continued to the Sanchez lot. We suspected that not all arms would be installed for rollout, and it seems this delivery would support that theory, as more parts were still arriving even while rollout preparations became blindingly obvious. The launch mount will feature 20 of these hold-down clamps in total, and the mount being prepared to roll does mean that SpaceX needs to stop installing parts on it. A smaller part was lifted by the crane here and then placed inside of the launch mount on Monday, which was very hard to spot during the complete lift as cars and trucks were parked in front of the gate and in front of my camera. We only caught it for a few glimpses, but it looks like some sort of armor plate. I don't know. In what could be another move to prepare the area for the launch mount's arrival and lift, the Pad B chopsticks were raised. You don't want your chopsticks getting in the way while you try to lift your very heavy launch mount. And with that, we were yet another step closer to this behemoth finally rolling out. Then came the biggest tell of all. We saw SpaceX workers start to remove some of the last scaffolding that was present on top of the launch mount, a clear indicator of an imminent move. However, some of the scaffolding that's like more permanent, especially around the deluge system, well, not permanent, but you know what I mean. We expected some of the scaffolding to stay on, the stuff on top was removed. Don't panic. Then on Tuesday night going into Wednesday, it was finally time. The giant, roughly 60-foot or 20-meter wide orbital launch mount started moving on 3 extra-large SPMTs at the Sanchez lot. This was the beginning of its ultimate rollout to the launch site. You can see that some of the more permanent scaffolding is still in place, which makes sense as SpaceX also needs to hook up the orbital launch mount once it's in place at the launch site. As you can see, the pad is significantly wider than the road and had quite an overhang, so this transport, even for Starbase, was more on the tricky side, as road signs and other objects on the side of the road were problematic for the launch mount, or I guess for the road signs themselves, as they'd probably be crushed by it. During the roll, it got pretty close to the walls a few times. As you can see, the scaffolding was very close to the concrete wall at the launch site right here, for example. Also, at one point, it almost looked like the steel plates that SpaceX put down to reinforce the surface of the ground were not enough, and the orbital launch mount and SPMT combination sunk into some mud next to the launch site. Honestly, we probably should have put this in the traffic segment also. Luckily, after taking it slow and turning off axles individually, they made it through. This is a perfect example of the advantage of SPMTs, with all of the tires able to individually adjust height, turning angle, and much more. After carefully rolling down Highway 4, the launch mount then arrived at the launch site, where it entered the gate and was parked next to the tower in preparation for a lift. Another very interesting hardware delivery happened on Wednesday, and this is where I have to trigger the speculation alarm. But this structure could look like something that connects to the launch mount or the booster from the gantry. It could, of course, be way more boring, and Adrian is very wrong, but the shape and height clearances here could give it the ability to connect to the booster in some shape or form. Maybe it's a part of a gantry booster quick disconnect system, or it's a pathfinder for the Starbase space elevator. We'll just have to wait and see. So, the launch mount is very heavy, right? Super extra heavy. So you need to counter that weight somehow with some sort of large amount of, I don't know, counterweights to lower the center of mass of the cranes during lift, right? Well, you're in luck. Basically, every single counterweight that's present in Starbase was rolled out on an SPMT at night, as you can see here. This army of counterweights entered the pad and is probably part of the needed equipment to lift the launch mount safely. On our flyover pictures, you can see where the launch mount is stationed in context to the second tower. Also, they do need 2 cranes to do this lift, which is why we see both of the giant launch site cranes moving into position to support lifting this very heavy item. They will both attach to the lifting rig and then lift the OLM together in tandem. One giant question mark we still had at the time was how SpaceX would even lift the giant launch mount safely in place. We knew it would involve 2 cranes, but that's about it.
How it would be lifted was answered on Monday because it was lifted. This is absolutely crazy to see.
This will be attached to the 4 launch mount clamps that have been installed on the launch mount, and they'll lift it from those clamps. Very similar to how SpaceX uses load spreaders with ships and boosters. Peeking inside of that flame trench, you can see how much progress SpaceX has made in hooking up the flame bucket since our last flyover. The piping that was still missing to the gantry seems to be mostly installed, and the gaps that were present in hooking up the deluge system also seem to be fully closed. It seems that the green deluge pipe in the ground is now all the way connected, although we can't confirm that anymore because there's dirt over it, but why would you cover it if it wasn't, fully hooked up? The side concrete walls are also mostly done, and it seems only the very edge of both sides still need some work. Over at the deluge tank farm, you can see the connection to the tank farm has been fully hooked up there to the water and nitrogen tanks as well. Also, next to the gantry, another fairly deep hole has appeared that seems to be the beginning of another foundation. Potentially some building related to operating the gantry, which will fuel the booster. Note, this building is not perfectly aligned with the gantry, which makes me just so upset. It's offset by a few degrees if you compare it to the gantry in the pad, and just slightly at an angle. Why, SpaceX? Just why? To the north of the pad, another large concrete area is being prepared as well. This could be as interesting as another tank farm, or as boring as just more parking space. We'll just have to wait and see. Or will we? Thankfully, based on the new FONSI for the environmental assessment, which we'll talk about in a bit, we know that the area might be a street and office space that are supposed to be installed there. Another part that is still missing for the full readiness of the second Starbase launch pad is, of course, the ship quick disconnect arm. Our flyover at least confirms that SpaceX has that part still around at the Sanchez site, and it looks like vehicles are present around it and working on the part. Of course, it's only needed once they actually close in on fueling ships at Pad B, but it looks like SpaceX is at least paying attention to the QD arm again. After winning the vote to make Starbase a city last week, SpaceX got even more good news this week for its operations in Texas. The FAA, or the Federal Aviation Administration, conducted a final review into SpaceX's requested increased launch cadence here in Boca Chica. And the final report was concluded with a FONSI, which means a finding of no significant impact. This basically means that the FAA sees no environmental or other problems with the increased launch cadence of up to 25 launches from Starbase a year. This is up from 5 a year, which was previously allowed. It also includes up to 50 annual landings, which makes sense, as that would be 1 for booster and 1 for ship per launch. Up to 3 launches of the 25 would be during nighttime hours, which seems kind of low, at least speaking from the perspective of a photographer who wants to shoot lots of Methalox long exposures. Landings for now are only allowed during daytime hours. This report also allows for up to 90 seconds a year of Starship static fire testing and up to 70 seconds a year of super heavy static fire testing. Especially the ship part here seems a little low, as they already have conducted 40 seconds alone with Ship 35, but they probably plan to lower the amount they need to do static fires and not do a bunch of long duration ones in the future. Overall, if we compare the changes from the 2022 Programmatic Environmental Assessment to now, the combined static fire testing is reduced quite substantially, while suborbital launches have been deleted completely. For that, the amount of super heavy launches has been increased by 20, and landings have grown accordingly. And there's even more. On Table 2, we can see a direct comparison of the vehicle that SpaceX is proposing in this report. We can see that the upgraded Super Heavy has grown by 9 meters, while Ship grew by 20 meters. This now brings the regulatory paperwork up to speed for a stack as tall as 150 meters. As expected, this report covers a 9-engined Ship and a 35-engined booster. The combined thrust of a notional 35-engine Super Heavy would total 103 meganewtons. That's a lot of newtons. That's almost 2.9 meganewton per single engine. Just for comparison, a Falcon 9 has a thrust of 7.6 meganewtons. 3 Raptor engines would already provide significantly more thrust than the whole Falcon 9 rocket, and 8 Raptor engines would dwarf even the mighty Falcon Heavy. These numbers are absolutely insane, and the crazy thing is, they're regulatorily approved. This is not a flip chart or a paper rocket that they might make in the future. They submitted a report and got it approved by the FAA to move forward. If we ever actually will see a 35-engine booster remains to be seen, but I think we all agree that a 9-engine ship is probably pretty likely. Either way, if they want to do it, now they can. In one of the more calm chopstick tests we've seen in recent weeks, the Pad A tower came to life again this week as the chopsticks went up only a few meters to test some of their movement ahead of what we hope will soon be stacking of the final flight prototypes. But of course, the main question is, what will happen with Ship 35 after its weird static fire and presumably a static fire redo maybe as soon as the day that this video comes out? The rollout for closure on the 10th wasn't used by Ship 35 and instead was used to transport the version 3 booster test tank. Thankfully, Ship 35 did roll out on Saturday at noon just before I recorded this video. Thanks, SpaceX. There is a scheduled closure for the 12th, showing a rollout from Massey's all the way to the launch site. So it seems that SpaceX's plan, at least as of right now, is to finish up testing of the ship at Massey's and then roll it straight to the launch site, no stop at the production site required. Meanwhile, Not Mars and NOTAMs have been slipping to the right, which might indicate that the flight net, or no earlier than date, is slipping as well. Speaking of Not Mars and NOTAMs, currently there are 2 scheduled, which give us quite conflicting information. On the NOTAM side, they're currently starting on May 13th, which of course at this point is unlikely, and most likely the initial launch date should everything have gone well. However, there is a second indicator. The NOTMAR, which initially started on May 20th, has now slipped to May 21st. This is a way more likely date if we consider that up till now, a static fire of the ship was still needed. Thus, May 21st may be our actual launch net date as of this moment. Of course, this could all change quickly, but as of right now, we expect Starship to fly no earlier than May 21st. So, Flight 9's launch date has been on some ice and slipping to the right quite a bit. Quite a week, huh? And next week might shape up with even more action, potentially the return of a full stack, and who knows, we'll see. Maybe they'll even blow up Test Tank 17. Either way, stay tuned, because you better believe we're gonna go live as soon as anything happens here in Starbase. Thanks again to Novium for sponsoring this video. Please support us and a company doing such cool things like Novium, and treat yourself or someone you know to a really rad writing device. Use code NSF to receive 10% off all hover pens and free shipping to most countries. And don't forget, get up to 30% off on the hover pen Traverse on Kickstarter today. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget, be excellent to each other.